Okay, so this lesson is about what I'm going to call going deep on a quote. This is a skill that we start in your sophomore year. As you build up in your English skills, in your reading skills, in your writing skills, you will gradually move away from reading a text just for meaning, just to understand it, and more towards reading a text as a way to figure out what an author is doing and what kinds of choices they're making when they're writing. And our talk about what words, what signs. This is one way that we've already started to think about what are the words that the author is using? What are the signs that the author is giving us as readers that the tone is dark or that the character is evil? What words are what signs? How can we prove that? What is the author doing? We also call this close reading. Sometimes we call it going deep on a quotation, or we can even call it analysis, which means which means from our roots, it means breakdown. So the materials that you need are you need a piece of loose leaf paper, and you need a pen, and you're going to take notes on the steps. The objective for this lesson is for me to be able to give you a quote, a random quote from a text that you know, and for you to be able to make a claim about that quote, introduce the quote, break the quote down, link it, and then conclude. So a lot of the elements that you learned last year at AmeliCon, and we're just extending a few of those elements in order to do better or deeper reading. So we are going to start with a claim. That's going to be step number 1. Now, if you want to get technical, we may not always begin with a claim. Sometimes your argument can start with a quote that you like, and then you make a claim based on that quote. But for the sake of today, we're just going to say that you began with a claim. So if we go back, reach all the way back into our memories from the first couple weeks of school when we read the short story 11. It was about that girl who was turning 11 that day, but she also felt 10, and she felt 9, and she felt 4, and it all had to do with this sweater that she said wasn't hers, and yet everyone else in class seemed to think that it was. So my very simple claim, and I'm just keeping things nice and easy here for the example, are that Rachel lacks the confidence to speak up about the sweater. Okay, so once we have our claim, step number 2 is for us to choose the quote. The thing is, though, we want to find a quote that's juicy. We don't just want any quote. We want a good quote. So how do we find a good, juicy quote? Well, first and foremost, and this doesn't apply to juicy quotes, this applies to any quote that you'd use in a paper. You want to make sure that it's going to support your claim, that it goes with your claim. You say that Rachel's not confident. The quote that you use better show that she's not confident. But that's not necessarily what makes it juicy. That just is what makes it a piece of evidence. So how do we find a juicy piece of evidence? Well, a juicy quote contains figurative language. It contains repetition. I'm looking down here at things from the sweep sheet. Big but words. It contains possibly antithesis or assonance. Remember, that's repeated vowel sounds. Or alliteration. Or any kind of telling punctuation. So exclamation points might tell us something. Question marks, dashes, ellipses, and lots of commas. So all of those fall under figurative language, or an author doing something with words or doing something with punctuation. Those are juicy quotes. Those are the kind of quotes we really want. So I'm going to show you two quotes, and we'll decide together. I've already decided, but we'll decide together which ones are juicy. If you're unsure, you'll see right here I say annotate the quote with the sweep sheet to see if it's a juicy one. So we've practiced that annotation strategy using that sweep sheet. Go ahead, annotate the quotation that you've chosen to find out if indeed it is juicy. So here's a quote that I believe shows Rachel's lack of confidence. She says, "Just sitting there with that look on my face and nothing coming out of my mouth." So I say that she does not have the confidence to speak up. And here I see that almost directly, almost exactly, nothing coming out of my mouth. She cannot speak up. So in that sense, it's a quote that will definitely help to prove my claim. But is it a juicy quote? Does it have telling punctuation? Does it have alliteration or assonance or antithesis or big butt words? I can't find it. I don't see it. No, it doesn't. It just proves my claim. So it's a quote. It's a piece of evidence. It's not a juicy quote. So a better example that I found is when Rachel says, "That's not, I don't, you're not mine." I finally say in a little voice that was maybe me when I was 4. That's not, I don't, you're not. We have repeated 2 words there, repeated again and again. So we have repetition, not only of words, not is repeated, but also structure. We see her words are cut off, so that's not. She's speaking quickly, right? She's not saying that is not, I do not, you are not. So we see those contractions there. That's not, don't, you're not. That's repeated. We have an ellipses here, which can often show that the character's thinking. They're trying to get something out. And then, of course, we have the repeated commas. So comma after comma. She's maybe taking a little breath. Remember, that's not a big breath. It's not a full stop. So she doesn't have a lot of time. She's speaking quickly. She's saying little breaths. She's not getting out full thoughts. These are not complete sentences. So many reasons why this is a juicier quote, and this is the kind of quote that I want to pick. It doesn't just prove my claim. It has all this figurative language. It has all these tricks and these tools that the author is doing to tell me, to show me that Rachel just cannot get these words out of her mouth. Okay, so step 3 of 5. Once we've got our claim, we've got our juicy quote, is we're going to introduce the quotation with context. So what do I mean by with context? 2 things. When the quote was said and how the quote was said. So if we just drop a quote in on a reader, we give a claim. Rachel lacks the confidence to speak up about the sweater. And then we go right into the quote. The reader doesn't know who's saying it. They don't know when in the story it's taking place. And they can't follow your argument with you. So we really need to always, always, always give context before the quote. What comes after the quote is the breakdown, and I'm going to talk about that next. Before the quote is context. When it was said, and just a little bit of how it was said, although we'll get more into that in the breakdown. So here's an example right here. We have the claim. After her teacher accuses her of owning the sweater and lying about it, that's my when, Rachel replies with a stutter. That's my how. How does she say the line? Is she shouting it? Is she whispering it? Here I'm saying she says it with a stutter, or I could say with a stammer. I could even say in a little voice, because we know Rachel then describes it herself that way. All right, that's step number 3. Step number 4 is our favorite step. What words? What signs? We're going to start to break down or close read, go deep on the quote that we chose. I'm going to call this sometimes E2 or evidence 2, the first evidence being the actual quote. The second part of that evidence that always has to go with it this year from here on out, second semester, is evidence 2, the breakdown. So here's how we break down. Number 1, point out what was juicy about the quote. So point out those things: repetition, punctuation, figurative language. Call them out. It could also involve stealing words. So one way that you can trick your teacher, like me, into thinking that you're breaking down a quote is by saying the word golden shows us this. So you're just stealing words directly from that quote. So I'm going to maybe steal the words, that's not, I don't. Well, I'm going to use those words in my breakdown just to show the reader, hey, I'm doing a breakdown here. I'm stealing words from the quote. So let's take a look at what that might look like. We have our claim. Rachel lacks the confidence to speak up about the sweater. I did not include the context yet. I have that above. Here's my quote. That's not, I don't, you're not mine. I finally say in a little voice that was maybe me when I was 4. Now I'm going to talk about 2 things, right? Pointing out what was juicy, the repetition, and also stealing some of the words. So grabbing some words from the quote that I thought were especially effective and talking about why they were effective. So I transition into my E2 with something like in this quote. I could also say here. I could also say in this example. I could also say in this moment. There are lots of different options for me to transition into this breakdown. I often like to use the term we see. I know that last year you were instructed not to use the first person. I think that that's accurate. As you get older, you can loosen up those rules a little bit, especially when it comes to using we, which is the first person plural. In this quote, we see repeated commas in the middle of Rachel's thoughts. So there I am. I'm pointing out that repetition of the comma, as if the commas are cutting off her words. The words that Rachel does express are coming out in short bursts of 2 words. Okay, so again, I'm talking about what the author's doing. She says, that's not, I don't, you're not. Right there, that's me stealing words from the quote. I literally took the words in the quote, I put them down in my analysis, showing that she cannot complete her thoughts. She cannot even complete a whole sentence. So I'm really just focusing in on this part right here. What's going on there? What is the repetition? What do we see with punctuation? How can I really push the juice out of that quote? Okay, so step number 5 is basically the link that you practiced really hard last year. So explaining how the evidence supports the claim. You had 2 different kinds of evidence. You had the actual evidence itself, and you had the breakdown. Now you want to bring the reader from that evidence back to that main claim. It helps, this is one tip, it helps to use some of the language, the words that you used in your initial claim or main idea. It can be really helpful to go back and use those words again so that the reader can really begin to see how you're coming back to that claim. So here was the breakdown that I just wrote. Now I want to connect that back to Rachel having such a lack of confidence that she cannot speak. So how am I going to connect this? So I said she cannot even complete a whole sentence. So these fragments, we know that those aren't whole sentences, right? Or bits of sentences show that Rachel cannot completely express herself. She would like to say that the sweater isn't hers, but she doesn't have the confidence. Now I'm getting back to using the words that I used in the claim. I talked about confidence. She doesn't have the confidence to speak out clearly. So she's trying, but she can't get those words out because she's not confident. That's my claim here. There I go, right there is my link. Beginning to show how these bits and fragments, how they prove a lack of confidence in the character. Okay, we're here. We're at the last step. This is all for one paragraph. Keep in mind, folks, this is just one paragraph. The last part is the conclusion. Summing up the paragraph by coming back to your claim and making sure the reader knows, almost as if you're ramming it down their throat, that you proved that claim that you made in that first sentence. So, how do you do that? How do you make sure they know that you proved what you said you'd prove? Well, you want to repeat the claim, and you want to remind the reader of how you proved it. So, there we go. Underlined is my close reading, my going deep. Then I have my link. Now I got to do those two things. I got to repeat the claim and remind the reader of how I proved it. Sometimes those two could go in the opposite way. I might remind the reader first and then repeat the claim. So let's try that. I'm going to do it that way. Rachel's stuttered speech. Her bursts of sentences that aren't complete show that she does not have the confidence to tell her teacher that the sweater simply is not hers. Okay, so did I do those two things? Repeating the claim. This is almost it exactly. She does not have the confidence to tell the teacher that this sweater simply isn't hers. So if I can find that pink color again, let's say it's this one. Highlight it. How did I show it? Well, I showed it with the language. I showed it with her stuttered speech and her bursts of sentences. So that's how I proved it, and I'm reminding the reader that's how I proved it. And that's it. Yay, I'm done!